Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's arrival at the G7 summit in Canada shows why the world cannot ignore India's rise anymore. The G7 could also be the stage for the first Modi-Trump meeting after the US president's repeated claims of facilitating the India-Pakistan ceasefire. However, Modi's security in Canada is very much the prime focus. Reports suggest Indian agencies have urged the Canadian side to boost the security umbrella for Prime Minister Modi, given the threat by misguided Khalistani radicals. News 18 quoted an Indian government official stating, quote, "Threats were taken seriously. Canadian officials have been requested to expand perimeter security and to closely monitor groups or individuals with known extremist associations," unquote. For the 1.8 million strong Indo-Canadian diaspora, which makes up over 3% of Canada's population, this is a highly significant visit.
This G7 summit will offer a significant chance to move past the recent diplomatic chill.
However, a handful of misguided Khalistani radicals are expected to create ruckus during Modi's visit and therefore grab easy headlines and publicity. Feeling sidelined and abandoned by Canadian government and especially Prime Minister Mark Carney's personal invite to the Indian Prime Minister, a Khalistani fringe group has threatened to disrupt this visit. Nevertheless, Indian Ministry of External Affairs believes this is an opportunity to reset strained bilateral ties.
I extended the invitation to Prime Minister Modi in that context, and he has accepted.
Ahead of the Canada visit, Prime Minister Modi stated, quote, "From Cyprus, I will travel to Canada to attend the G7 summit at the invitation of Prime Minister His Excellency Mark Carney. The summit will provide space for the exchange of views on pressing global issues and the priorities of the global South. I also look forward to engaging with leaders from partner countries," unquote. But the biggest development ahead of Modi's visit is the new information sharing pact between India and Canada. This new pact will allow Indian agencies to share intelligence on Khalistani separatist radicals who pose a grave threat to Indian national security as well as Canada. MEA spokesperson Randhir Jaiswal claimed, quote, "India-Canada, vibrant democracies bound by shared commitment to the rule of law," adding that the meeting between the two leaders will, quote, "offer an important opportunity to exchange views on bilateral and global issues and to explore pathways to reset the relationship based on mutual respect, shared interests, and sensitivity to each other's concerns," unquote. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney ignored Khalistani protests and political pressure by inviting Modi, a decision also backed by Canada's main opposition party as well. Clearly, Ottawa is keen to mend ties with New Delhi. A former Canadian diplomat, David McKinnon, was quoted in DW News saying, quote, "The politics of this decision in Canada and particularly within the Liberal Party were not easy, but Carney made the right choice. It's also notable that the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, quickly welcomed it."
We, as Conservatives, understand that the invitation is necessary.
He added, "A big outstanding question is whether this trip leads to a mutually agreeable off-ramp from the allegations of Indian government interference in Canada, including involvement in Nijjar murder, and India's allegations about Khalistani activities in Canada," unquote. Indian government has been raising the red flag over Canada giving space to Khalistani extremists who celebrate violence against India. The Air India bombing in 1985 by Khalistani extremists remains Canada's biggest air disaster, while Hindu temples, Indian consulates, and Indian events are regularly attacked by Khalistani goons. Modi's visit is meant to reassert India's stand that such acts of violence should never be tolerated. Meanwhile, it remains to be seen if Canada will present any evidence on former Prime Minister Trudeau's claims of the involvement of Indian Indian agencies in the murder of separatist Hardeep Nijjar, who had been gunned down by unknown assailants in June 2023 in British Columbia. Ottawa has failed to provide any evidence till date to back these claims. Ties had nosedived further after Trudeau's allegations, with both nations expelling diplomats as New Delhi rubbished all allegations and demanded concrete evidence. Canadian authorities even named an Indian diplomat as person of interest in the investigation, yet Trudeau himself, when grilled during a public inquiry, confessed that Canada never had, quote, hard evidential proof. In other words, Trudeau was parroting the Khalistani propaganda for vote bank politics. The new intelligence sharing pact will allow greater coordination between the agencies of both the nations and hopefully allow the truth to come out. Reports in India had suggested inter-gang rivalry, while Hardeep Nijjar's own son, Balraj Nijjar, had confessed that Khalistanis like Panoon had exploited Nijjar's death for their own personal gain.
It's kind of difficult to understand if someone's acting as dad's friend or if they want to just use it for their betterment.
With Trudeau gone and Khalistani sidelined, trade could play a big role in rebooting bilateral ties.
It's an opportunity for a new Prime Minister here in Canada to work with Mr. Modi.
In 2023, India's exports to Canada stood at $7.5 billion, while imports were $5.12 billion. While impressive, these are relatively modest figures, and there is tremendous scope for growth. This at a time when India-US trade has reached near record levels at $120 billion yearly, with an aim to hit $500 billion yearly by 2030. Canadian Prime Minister Carney had himself spoken on India's rise as a 21st century power while justifying G7's sixth consecutive invitation to the Indian Prime Minister. He claimed, quote, India is the fifth largest economy in the world, effectively the most populous country in the world, central to and at the heart of those supply chains, unquote. Of course, India has recently overtaken Japan to become the fourth largest global economy and is in line to become the third biggest global economy before 2030. Carney insisted that India must be at the table when discussing issues that can potentially shape our world. Quickly coming back to the issue of Khalistani extremists who are out to grab headlines. Firstly, these are fringe groups within the thriving Indian Sikh community. 50 to 100 people motivated by money and hate don't really represent the Sikh community at a time when even the Indian Air Force chief is a Sikh and so was a former Prime Minister. So no one is buying the Khalistani agenda. Secondly, there are enough reports which suggest that these fringe groups are backed and paid by Pakistani intelligence agencies as part of Islamabad's propaganda war against India. Reality is that these groups have more chances of creating a Khalistan in Canada, or if they want to be historically accurate, then inside today's Pakistan, because it will never happen in India. But what makes the Khalistanis truly misguided is the fact that the Pakistanis had killed nearly 1 million Sikh and Punjabis during partition, and this according to the Akal Takht. But today, Khalistani fringe groups have no issues joining hands with the same Pakistanis to attack Hindus, temples, and even Indian consulates. Anyway, Canada's focus remains on boosting the fragile relations with India. Canada's Privy Council office issued a statement stating, quote, India has been at the last 6 G7 conferences. It's one of the biggest and fastest growing economies in the world. We need to sell our natural gas, our civilian nuclear power technology, and other resources projects to India, unquote. The Tri-Nation Tour is Prime Minister Modi's first overseas trip since Operation Sindoor, when Indian military conducted strikes on 9 terror headquarters deep inside Pakistan in retaliation to the Pahalgam terror attack in Kashmir, in which 26 Hindu tourists were identified and massacred by Pakistan-based terror group in front of their families. With Operation Sindoor, India has shown to the world that it will never tolerate Pakistan's state-sponsored religious terror. So while the G7 has invited the Indian Prime Minister once again, countries like Pakistan and its backers like Turkey have not been invited. This should be a wake-up call for Islamabad to shun extremism and dismantle their terror network, or else the Indian military will do it for them. Modi's G7 visit is another opportunity for India to reforge global alliances and move forward towards the path of Viksit Bharat 2047, which aims to transform India into a truly developed nation by 100 years of the nation's independence. But what do you believe? Why can't the world ignore India's rise anymore? Leave a comment with your opinion, hit the like button and subscribe to Inconnect News.